There he is, the officer. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How you doing, brother?
Doing real good. Thanks so much for taking some time and hopping on here. I wanted to just first of all ask you, if you don't mind, to just give us a little bit of background on who you are as the Officer Tatum, because I was sort of watching a lot of your content over this past weekend. I think you might be from Tucson, actually.
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Texas. I was my whole family lived in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas. I played football, high school football. I was an All-American football player, which led me to play college football. So I played at the University of Arizona, which is in Tucson. And so I played there for a while. I entered the 2010 NFL draft. I didn't get drafted like I'd hoped. I ended up becoming a police officer in Tucson for 6.5 years, where I was a SWAT operator. I was a field training officer, public information officer. I did a bunch of stuff on the police department. And because of, my political stance and certain things, I think God led me into what I'm doing now, with the social media stuff. And that's kind of how I got to this point, just real quick.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and you've done an amazing job. And one of the things before you hopped on here that I was talking to the audience about was sort of this dynamic that exists between officers and defense lawyers. I'm a criminal defense lawyer practicing today, and so sometimes people think that we go into the courtroom together and we're at each other's throats, or we want to sort of gouge each other's eyeballs out, and that just hasn't been my experience, right? And I wanted to ask you about that. Have you had a similar experience dealing with defense lawyers in court?
No, I haven't had a lot of experience with defense lawyers. It's a running theme that police officers are against defense attorneys, and the defense attorneys try to get you caught up in something. I've done defense attorney what they call it interviews with defense attorneys, pre-trial interviews, but I've never been in trial. Most of the cases that I've done, the person they do a plea deal and we never have to show up in court. So I understand the sentiment and kind of like the rumors of this kind of defiant relationship. However, I've never experienced any negative relationship with defense attorneys.
Yeah, and that's largely been my experience. There's been every now and then you get an officer that really doesn't like defense lawyers, and the feeling's probably mutual going both ways. But largely, we're all, I think, trying to work towards the same thing, which is more justice. And we've got different perspectives on how to get there, but we're still excited, or really our life mission is about getting there. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your work. So as you said, you sort of transitioned into this social media commentating. You've got a huge presence all over the place. And on my channel, on our audience, we've been focusing a lot on criminal justice, in particular, talking a lot about the same things that you talk about with, Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And, now we've got Dante Wright and Kim Potter, and, the list goes on. And you talk about all of these types of cases. But I just was hoping that maybe you could give us an overview. What's inspiring you to get out there and speak on behalf of officers, and what is your general position on the justice system? We're talking a lot about it. Do you think that this is something that needs reform? What's your sort of position on the state of affairs in, police justice world?
Yeah, so I'll answer your first question. My passion comes from being a police officer. Physically being there on the job, seeing the day-to-day grind that we do, being there, writing the case reports, going and doing, pre-trial interviews and different things like that. And I just feel like the public have no idea what police officers go through and what they actually do. And the reason why I feel so strongly about that is because before I became a police officer, I had no idea what cops actually had to do, what they could and couldn't do, what rights they had, what rights the citizen has against the police, how they're trained. All of these things are something that I learned when I became a police officer. The stress of the job, some of the stuff that we see that most people will never dream of seeing in real life. The fear factor, the life being in danger on a day-to-day basis, having to pull your gun on people, having to de-escalate under pressure, it's just been, it's crazy. So my passion is to give police officers a voice. And when it comes to the criminal justice system, I think the criminal justice system is flawed, but I think it functions properly. It functions reasonably. And in many cases, I think that the criminal justice system let off too many criminals, more so than it put them behind bars for a significant amount of time. So I think that it does need improvement. It's not perfect. They're not going to always get it right. You're talking about the jury of your peers. People are crazy. Some of these people probably shouldn't even be on a jury pool. They have no idea about any concept of society. They know nothing about laws. It's the first time they've ever probably read a law out loud. And so it's definitely has some kinks in it. But I think that it's this sentiment that the criminal justice system is just flawed towards Black people. And it's, in my personal experience, it just haven't been the case. And you see that played out with some of these police shootings that I often talk about. And I tell you right off the bat that that's justified, that they're not going to go to jail. And 99.9% of the time I'm right, because it follows the use of force continuum, the use of force policies and law, and it's pretty easy, but the public seem to not be able to understand it.
Yeah, and this is why I was so excited to have you on, is because when I propose solutions, I am thinking from a defense attorney's perspective. I think, well, this is ridiculous. Cops shouldn't be allowed to do this. This is so offensive. This is egregious to the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. But, when I come up with a plan on how we're going to fix this, like you said, I've never been an officer, right? I've never been on the other side and see how it feels to walk a day in your shoes. And so I wanted to sort of ask you about, I don't know if you want to get into any specifics on any of this stuff, but, the George Floyd bill is sort of something that last week President Biden was out there talking about. In his speech to Congress, he talked for an hour, but he gave us like 3 minutes on justice reform. And it was, mostly a story with very little specifics other than he likes George Floyd's bill. Yeah. And so if they run with that, from a police officer's perspective, what's your take on that? And what, I'm not sure that it's fair to ask you to speak for all other officers, but certainly you can give us sort of a consensus.
Yeah, I can give you a consensus opinion about people that I know. I know a lot of police officers. They talk to me and message me all the time. First, I think it's ridiculous to even name any bill after a person who was a lifelong criminal that unfortunately died at the hands of a police officer on one given occasion. This guy shouldn't be kind of like the idea of criminal justice reform. However, not only is the name in and of itself seem to be problematic in my personal opinion and the opinion of many people that I know, also the reform has nothing to do with what happened to George Floyd. They don't teach an officer to put his knee on the back or the neck of somebody while they're begging for their lives and watching them die. Nobody teaches that. That's not in any protocol. That's why he went to jail. And that's why he ended up inevitably getting charged, because they proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he was culpable. So when you look at it, you say, what reform are you talking about? Defunding the police? That's not going to help somebody like George Floyd, stay alive, because they're not going to get adequate training. They're not going to get quality police officers if you defund them. Then, they go down a list of systemic racism in the police department. Like George Floyd's case had nothing to do with race. I mean, the officer would have done that to anybody. And based on the information that I have. So this is all political fluff from my perspective. I think if they really want to do criminal justice reform or police reform, they should probably talk to police officers and see what they think, a level of reform should be, instead of talking to activists.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that you are, that side is a crucial component to the conversation. And it feels like they're sort of being left out, on the other end of, hung out to dry, so to speak. But what would an acceptable solution look like to officers? Or let me put it another way. You sort of explained, or you mentioned the word defund the police. And, there's this pendulum that sort of feels like it's swinging that direction. The country sort of does this back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. We had this, crime wave. We had Joe Biden with all the crime bills. And so it was sort of, the country was up sort of concerned about burgeoning crime. Well, the pendulum feels like it's swinging the other way a little bit. Like maybe this defund the police movement has some momentum. What do officers do about that? Do they leave certain departments? Do they move to different professions? What's the response if this is continuing to be successful?
Well, this is definitely a morale killer. I have never heard of an officer in this era that have said positive things about being a police officer. I mean, most police officers are ready to get out of there. Some of my friends have retired this year. They can't wait to get away from policing. It's not fun anymore. It's not, you put on the badge and you're honorably saving people's lives and, you become the silent hero. It's never that anymore. If you're white and you accidentally kill a Black man, or you kill a Black man justifiably, or he kill you, you're wrong in every form of fashion. And there's no accountability to the criminal. So it really hurts morale. And so when morale is damaged, what do police officers do? They don't proactively police. They're not going out there and putting their neck on the line to try to go so far as to find criminals who haven't committed crimes yet, going out searching for people who are wanted, riding by certain blocks where they know criminal activity happens, drug dealings is going on. They're not doing that. They're hanging out of the precinct. They're riding around. They're ducking off, waiting for the call to come out, for the call for service. So that's going to be detrimental to the community, because police are not feeling like they're supported and feeling like they're excited to be at work. I mean, you got to think, even in the greatest era of policing, it's not an easy job, man. It is taxing, especially if you work the midnight shift. You work a 12-hour shift almost every night. When you leave the house, you got to go to the briefing. Then when you leave, you never leave on time, and people need you all day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, call to call to call to call. Nobody calls you when they're having a good day and their birthday party is going well. They call you when they're at the worst moment. So that grief, that pain, the struggle, the animosity, all of that stuff pours on you every single day. And it's a toll. And then, you have to write case reports. You have to deal with defense attorneys. You have to, you have the Constitution. You have people's rights that you need to know whether or not you're violating them or not. You have split-second decisions of, do I shoot this guy? Do I not shoot this guy? Do I live or do I die? And that's when policing is great. Then when you add this other stuff on top of it, it's going to end up in a really, really bad situation for law enforcement.
I can't imagine how it doesn't, because I was watching the Micaiah Bryant case, and that officer, in my opinion, that was one of the cleanest shoots, the cleanest actions that I've seen. This was sort of like the epitome of being a police officer. You get called to a scene, it's madness, it's chaos. You walk up, you run up there, you try to save somebody's life. Oh my gosh, somebody is being stabbed. You shoot them, you save their life, and the whole world says that you're a piece of garbage. LeBron James says, "We're coming after you next." I'm going, what? Like you want to sort of revere those officers who are able to perform at their highest level. And when you don't appreciate that, I'm not sure why they would stick around anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, that guy could have been eating donuts right before that call with his guard down, and all of a sudden he got to snap it into gear and he got to kill a 16-year-old. You know what I'm saying? And I don't necessarily think his motive was the killer. It's the shooter.
Yeah.
To eliminate her as a threat. Unfortunately, she succumbed to her injuries. But I mean, you got to be on it, man. You never think when you go to work as a police officer. That's no police officer. You never think when you go to work, today I'm gonna kill somebody. Today I'm gonna actually kill a 16-year-old girl who's trying to stab another 16-year-old girl. You just don't think that people would go that far. But you got to be ready. And this officer was ready. He jumped out of the car, and right away, people are fighting in front of him. The craziest thing ever, and probably the biggest shock, is that people are stabbing each other in front of me. This guy kicks the girl in the head. We're standing right here. What is happening? He sees the knife and he's on point. He didn't shoot the person he wasn't supposed to shoot. He didn't miss. He hit the target that eliminated the threat of killing another person. And if he wasn't white and she wasn't black, he would be getting a commendation from the police department, and we would never hear this story. The unfortunate part is that they always draw in these racial components. And I'll tell you this, they drew the racial component without even watching the body-worn camera. They never saw it. It wasn't even out yet. And they were already saying they had no business killing that girl. And people in the community, some of them were saying, this was unjustified. She was executed. And, if it's too juicy, you need to wait a little bit to let the facts come out, and lo and behold, it was justified.
Yeah. So what do you think, we've got like a minute left or a couple minutes. What do you think is, the next step or the next solution? What are we talking about? Is it about having more conversations? Is it about, focused on local reforms? Is it about a national registry or accountability, transparency, sort of, from your perspective, a law enforcement perspective, where should we be going?
Yeah, we should definitely leave the federal government out of it. They cannot one size fit all every police agency in each individual state, in each individual county and municipality. There's no way. There's too many cultures going on. There's too many different protocols on policing, and each state needs to be policed the way the people want them to be policed. There are some states that want to legalize everything. Their policing shouldn't have to be as hard as in Texas and in Arizona if that's not what the state wants. So the state has rights to enforce what they want to enforce. Some states don't want body-worn cameras. Some states do. And I feel like that each state has the right to do that. So let's give the power back to the states, and let's look at this not from I hate the police, we want to defund the police, they're all racist white people, we need to look at it from the sense of saying, let's look at the police department. Let's bring people in the community and police together to have a reasonable conversation. Not the naysayers and all of the Monday morning quarterbacks, the people who are actually in the community, people who actually want to understand policing, and have the commanders and people who actually do this for a living have a conversation about what does our community need. And that's where I think the best solution moving forward is not these big time talkers that's on TV trying to, race hustle, but the people who actually live in these communities having these conversations.
That's beautiful. And I think that's a beautiful way to end it. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here, right? You're on one side, I'm traditionally on the other side. I think that we're both, more in alignment about, the role of government and sort of our rights and responsibilities as citizens. But, we both do want to work towards something that improves everything for everybody. It's just about how do we get there? And if you have a bunch of people, hucksters out there making a bunch of things, turning things into something that they're not, it's really difficult to have that conversation. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. Can we send people to one of your projects or over to your channel? I've already plugged your channel before we got on here. I know you don't need any more subscribers, but we'll send them over your direction.
Hey, we can always use more subscribers. So the Officer Tatum, theofficertatum.com is actually where you can find every single thing that I do. My store, my book, everything is on theofficertatum.com. And if you put the Officer Tatum into YouTube, you'll see. And brother, I would love to have you on my YouTube channel so we can have a conversation. It is beautiful to see a police officer and an attorney talk about these things, because there's things that I don't know about being an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I just know what we try to do to not get caught up by a defense attorney. But now sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we need to be defended, and then we become best friends. So, I would love to have you on my channel. Let's set it up.
Sure. I'd love to do that. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think we need more perspectives, more ideas, more conversation, and from people who can just sort of let's get down to brass tacks here. We don't need to make this into something that it's not. Let's talk about real solutions. And so, Officer Brandon Tatum, I really appreciate you coming on the show, my friend. Have a great evening, and then we'll connect offline and hopefully we can speak again.
Yeah, man. God bless you, brother. I'll see you next time.
You too. All right, my friends. That was the Officer Brandon Tatum. So he joined us here, and I thought that was a nice conversation. And I actually think that he's doing good work. As I mentioned, I think that this is an important topic that we need to have more conversations about. And then maybe we'll see some real improvement. One of the biggest things that drives me bananas about this whole criminal justice reform topic is the idea that we've had the same elected officials, the same politicians, the same people who are in power for the last 30 years, who've created the very system that we're all unhappy with. They're telling us that they have the solution now to fix that. And I just doubt it, because they've been working on it for the last 30 years. And they haven't done anything. They've got nothing to show for it. So that was the Officer Tatum, everybody.